The planet we all share is changing. Each week brings fresh headlines of crazy weather and climate-related destruction. Yet some people doubt there even is a climate crisis. All they need to do is look to the skies.
For people who think that the climate crisis isn't a crisis, I would say watch the weather. Watch how many 90-degree days do we have in the summer anymore, how often you can't go out, how much snow do we get in the winters. Are our winters the same as they used to be? They're not. They're much milder. Our summers are much hotter. This is only the beginning. It's only going to get worse unless we address this issue. The freakiness of climate weather is going to occur more and more frequently. We will see, for example, fewer rainstorms, but more intense when they occur. So we may see almost drought conditions at time, and then when we see rain, it's in a torrential downpour and results in flooding.
Torrential downpours aren't just in other states. It's happening in West Virginia, according to Evan Hansen, a member of the state legislature from Monongalia County.
Climate crisis is impacting us in West Virginia. Just in my district in June and July, we had 2 heavy rainfall events that caused widespread damage. And the reason is because our infrastructure is not built to handle these huge rainfall events. Luckily, nobody got killed in Morgantown, but just a few years ago, 23 people got killed in West Virginia based on the unprecedented rainfall and flooding.
Where do we start to deal with this daunting climate crisis head on? Bryant says, with the science and the facts as laid out by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
They're the climate scientists, and they say by 2030 we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45%, and by 2050 we need to be net zero, meaning we're going to continue to emit carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, but we're going to be able to offset those reductions by absorbing carbon dioxide through growing trees or other mechanisms, but we'll even out. We'll be at net zero, and that's the goal of the IPCC, and that's one that the Climate Alliance has adopted.
Drastically reducing greenhouse gas emissions and getting to net zero emissions require basic changes in how we produce and use energy. This will affect everything, from the kind of cars we drive, to how we heat and cool our homes, to how electricity is generated. Bryant explains why we must rapidly rein in the deadly effects of methane and carbon dioxide in the world today.
Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. It's very effective at trapping heat into the globe. About 30 times more effective than carbon dioxide, the other major greenhouse gas. But it dissipates in about 10 years. So if we do a very good job of controlling methane emissions, we're going to see real results in the next decade. Carbon dioxide is exactly the opposite. It is much more prevalent. It's not as effective at trapping heat in, but it's going to stay around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's going to last not just my lifetime or my child's lifetime, my son's lifetime, but his sons and their children and their children and their children and their children. It just goes on. If we're going to protect future generations, we have to take significant steps today to decrease the amount of greenhouse gas emissions we put into the atmosphere.
Listening to climate scientists and heeding their advice is at the heart of the positions taken by the members of the West Virginia Climate Alliance.
For our organization, West Virginia Rivers, as well as the Climate Alliance, I think we put science in the forefront. The science has to drive the policy. There are certain other social, economic considerations that get into the mix, but if we're not accountable to the science, this isn't going to work out well. You know, I think at the end of the day, when it comes to responding to climate, we can do things that look good, feel good. But if we're not meeting those scientific benchmarks that we know we have to meet to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, again, it's going to be a lot of wasted time, and we just don't have the time to waste.
But doesn't weather change all the time? Isn't this all just normal fluctuations in weather patterns seen throughout history?
There is a difference between weather and climate. Weather is what happens today or this week. Climate is what happens over the globe over a 30-year period. If you look at temperatures over time, back in the 1870s, it's flat line. About 1960, they began a straight line up like that, and they show no indication of leveling off. People say, oh, this is a new normal. No, the new normal is it's going to continue to increase and increase in temperature. That's the new normal.
The science and the scientists all agree. Act now, or suffer the consequences we are seeing right now and which are growing far worse for children living today who will inherit tomorrow's world.
Here in 2021, what we know is that we have to act now. The science is telling us that we cannot delay any further.
The climate crisis is not some far-off doomsday scenario we can flick on and flick off like watching Netflix or YouTube. It affects lives and communities daily across the planet, and right here in West Virginia.
I care about the climate crisis because it's probably the most important challenge we're facing as a state and as a country. It's impacting West Virginians right now. Our infrastructure isn't built to handle these fast flushes of rain. It's killing people in West Virginia. It's really important for federal climate solutions to have West Virginia on board. It's not just about having the votes, but it's about having a durable policy that will work for years and for decades so that we could actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions in a way that solves the crisis. And the only way to do that, in my opinion, is to find policies that West Virginians support.
In the face of all the pessimistic, dire science about the climate crisis, how does one keep optimism about the future?
Well, I go through periods of pessimism and optimism. Just a few weeks ago, when the IPCC put out their report, the Code Red for Humanity, it was right around that time that the governor appointed the former president of the Coal Association to the Public Service Commission. And it was about that time that he appointed the current president of the Coal Association to the Public Energy Authority, two important decision-making bodies that are going to help shape the future of energy policy in West Virginia. I understand the pessimism, but there's optimistic things as well. We passed several bills over the last couple sessions here in West Virginia related to renewables and energy efficiency that never would have seen the light of day just 5 years ago. And I think we could build on those. I think those are first steps, but there's a lot more that can be done, and there's people like me and many others at the legislature that are working on these issues.
For me, I simply just cannot not care about the climate crisis. It is the existential threat of our time, and I think what got me thinking about it more and more is I don't have children myself, but I have nieces and nephews, and as I get older, I feel this obligation and sense of responsibility to do whatever I can, to do whatever we can collectively to provide a healthy place to live for generations to come. The stakes are high.
I think it's important for us to recognize that we all have a responsibility to pass on to future generations an habitable world, that we have stewardship of the land and the water and the air. And we need to take care of that and make sure that we give our children as good a future as we inherited from our parents.